My name is Emily, and this happened when I was a junior in college. After spending my first 2 years in a standard dorm, I finally got a spot in Ashford Hall, one of the older dorms on campus. It was an all-women's building, 4 stories high, with creaky wooden floors and dimly lit hallways. The rooms were bigger than in the freshman dorms, and the atmosphere was quieter, which I liked. But there was something about the place that felt off. I told myself it was just the age of the building, the way the pipes groaned at night, or how the stairwell lights flickered every so often. Still, the unease lingered, like the walls were holding on to something they wouldn't let go. The dorm had a reputation. Nothing major, just the usual campus rumors. Some girls claimed they heard footsteps in the halls when no one was there. Others swore their doors would be unlocked in the morning, even if they were sure they locked them the night before. The 4th floor, in particular, had the worst stories. It was the only floor that had a few empty rooms, and people said they stayed vacant for a reason. There were whispers about a girl who had lived there years ago and never left, though no one seemed to know exactly what happened to her. Some said she dropped out and disappeared. Others insisted something worse had happened. I lived on the 3rd floor, so I never thought much about it. But even though I tried to ignore the stories, there were nights when I lay awake, staring at my ceiling, listening. To what? I wasn't sure. The building had a way of making silence feel loud, like there was something just beyond my hearing, just out of sight. One night, about a month into the semester, I was in my room finishing an assignment when I heard something in the hallway. At first, I thought it was just one of the other girls coming back late, but the footsteps didn't sound right. They were slow, uneven, almost like someone was dragging one foot behind them. I glanced at the time, 2:47 a.m. Too late for anyone to just be getting back from class or the library. I turned down my music and strained to listen. The footsteps passed my door, then stopped. I held my breath, waiting to hear a key turn in a lock or a door creak open, but nothing happened. Whoever it was just stood there, unmoving. I waited, frozen, as the seconds stretched on. Then, just as I reached for my phone, the sound started again, but this time, it was coming back toward my door. I don't know why, but I felt an overwhelming need to check the peephole. Maybe I just wanted to confirm that it was one of my dorm mates, someone I could name. Slowly, I got up from my chair and crept toward the door, careful not to let the old floorboards creak beneath me. My heartbeat felt too loud in the silence. When I reached the door, I hesitated for a second before pressing my eye against the peephole. The hallway outside was dim, lit only by the weak glow of the emergency exit sign at the far end. At first, I saw nothing, just the closed doors of the other rooms. But then, just at the edge of my vision, something moved. A figure, standing unnaturally still, facing my door. My breath caught in my throat. The figure wasn't standing like someone waiting for a friend or debating whether to knock. It was too still, too deliberate, like it was listening. I couldn't make out any details, just a shape, slightly hunched, standing in the shadows near my door. My hand hovered over the lock, my instincts screaming at me not to make a sound. I waited, hoping they would leave, but they didn't. They just stood there. Then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, they leaned forward. Not moving toward my door, but closer to the peephole itself, as if they knew I was watching. My stomach twisted. I wanted to step back, to retreat into the safety of my room, but I was frozen in place. The moment stretched endlessly. Then, without warning, the figure's head gave a slight, deliberate tilt, a motion so eerily slow that it sent a chill down my spine. It was acknowledging me. It knew. I stumbled back from the door, my pulse hammering in my ears. I didn't want to look again, but I couldn't help myself. I inched forward, pressing my eye to the peephole once more, but the hallway was empty. The figure was gone. For a split second I felt relief, but it didn't last. Something wasn't right. The dorm was old, and the floors creaked with every step, yet I hadn't heard a single footstep leaving. No door opening, no movement at all. It was as if they had vanished into thin air. I stood there, gripping the doorknob with sweaty hands, debating whether to check the hallway, but every instinct told me not to. Instead, I reached up and slid the deadbolt into place, double-checking that my door was locked. That should have made me feel safer. It didn't. I forced myself to step away from the door, trying to shake the lingering unease. It was probably just one of the girls playing a prank, I told myself. Maybe someone had been out late and was messing around, trying to scare whoever was awake. But no matter how much I tried to rationalize it, something about the way the figure had moved, so slow, so deliberate, felt wrong. I climbed into bed, pulling the covers up to my chin, but sleep wouldn't come. Every small sound in the dorm made my nerves twitch. The distant hum of the hallway lights, the occasional groan of the old pipes. Then, just as I was starting to convince myself that I had imagined the whole thing, I heard it. A faint tap. Not at my door, but at my closet. I went completely still. The sound was so soft, I almost convinced myself I hadn't heard it at all. But then it came again, a single, deliberate tap against the closet door. My breath hitched. I hadn't opened that closet all night. I hadn't even been near it. My mind scrambled for explanations. Maybe something had shifted. Maybe a draft had moved one of the hangers. But deep down, I knew better. Someone was inside. The memory of the missing footsteps in the hallway crashed over me like ice water. The figure hadn't left. It had been here the whole time. I wanted to run, to throw open my door and sprint down the hall, but my body wouldn't move. My eyes stayed locked on the closet, my breath shallow, my fingers digging into the blanket. Then, slowly, the silence stretched, so long that I started to doubt myself. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe my exhausted brain was playing tricks on me. But just as I began to exhale, the door shifted. Not much, just the faintest movement, like someone pressing against it from the inside. The air in the room turned heavy, thick with the kind of fear that coils around your throat. My hand crept toward my phone on the nightstand, my fingers shaking as I tried to unlock it. And then, the closet handle began to turn. I didn't think, I just reacted. I threw myself off the bed, scrambling backward until I hit the far wall. The closet door creaked open an inch, then another, revealing nothing but darkness inside. My phone was still in my hand, but my fingers were shaking too hard to dial. I wanted to scream, to run, to do anything but sit there frozen. Then, in the sliver of darkness between the door and the frame, I saw it. An eye, wide, unblinking, staring straight at me. My breath caught in my throat, and for a moment, neither of us moved. Then the door swung open. But before anything could happen, the hallway lights flickered on and a voice called from outside. "Emily, are you awake?" It was my roommate, Claire. The moment shattered. I scrambled up and lunged for the door, yanking it open to find her standing there, rubbing her eyes. "I heard something weird," she mumbled. I turned back toward the closet, heart pounding, but it was empty. Just my clothes, my shoes, and the perfectly still hangers swaying slightly, as if someone had just been there. I stood there, breathless, until Claire put a hand on my shoulder. "Are you okay?" she asked. I swallowed hard and nodded, forcing a shaky smile. I didn't sleep that night, but morning came like nothing had happened. I wanted to believe it was a dream, that I had imagined the whole thing, but as I got ready for class, I noticed something. The closet door, which I always kept closed, was open again. Just a crack. This isn't really my story, but I suppose it's the only one I have left to tell. I've lived in this modest two-story home for the better part of 20 years. My wife Margaret and I built a life here, watched the seasons change from the porch, raised our children within these walls, and grew old together. But now it's just me. The house is too quiet, too big for one person, but I stay because I don't know where else to go. I spend most of my days sitting on the porch, listening to the sounds of the neighborhood, sipping coffee, and pretending I still have someone to talk to. I keep myself busy in small ways, reading the newspaper even when the news doesn't matter to me, tending to the garden Margaret loved, listening to the old jazz records she left behind. But the silence always creeps back in. The house across the street had been empty for months, its windows dark, the yard overgrown. I had gotten used to the stillness, so when I saw a moving truck pull up one morning, it caught me off guard. A man stepped out, middle-aged, dressed in a plain jacket and jeans, carrying only a single duffel bag. No family, no furniture, no car, just him. I watched from my porch as he walked up to the house, unlocked the door, and disappeared inside without so much as a glance around. Something about it didn't sit right with me. Days passed, but the house remained eerily quiet. No signs of life, no deliveries, no visitors, not even the faint glow of a television in the evening. The man never sat on the porch, never tended to the yard, never even opened the curtains. I would catch glimpses of him sometimes, moving past the window like a shadow, but that was it. I told myself it wasn't my business. People grieve in different ways. Maybe he had lost someone too. And yet, there was something unsettling about the way he existed. Not living, just occupying space. I tried not to dwell on it, but in a neighborhood like this, people notice things. Mrs. Callahan, the widow down the street, mentioned how she'd never seen him at the grocery store or walking to the cafe like everyone else did. Mr. Harris, the retired mailman, said the guy hardly got any mail, just the occasional letter. No bills, no subscriptions, nothing that suggested a real life being lived inside that house. It made me uneasy in a way I couldn't quite explain, like the man was more of a ghost than a neighbor. One evening, as I sat on my porch nursing a cup of coffee, I finally saw him step outside. It was near dusk, the sky painted in shades of orange and violet, and the air carried the crisp bite of an approaching autumn night. He stood at the edge of his porch, hands tucked into the pockets of his jacket, staring out at the empty street as if waiting for something. I considered calling out a greeting, but something in his posture made me hesitate. He wasn't just looking, he was watching. His eyes weren't wandering the way someone's do when they're lost in thought. They were fixed, unmoving, locked on something unseen. I sat there waiting for him to do something, light a cigarette, take a walk, even just shift his weight, but he remained perfectly still. 5 minutes passed, then 10. He didn't move an inch. Eventually, the streetlights flickered on, casting long shadows across the pavement, and just like that, he turned and walked back inside. No acknowledgement of my presence, no glance in my direction, just a quiet retreat into the darkened house. I didn't know why, but a cold feeling settled in my stomach. Something about that moment wasn't right. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I told myself I was being foolish, just an old man with too much time on his hands, imagining things that weren't there. But as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I kept replaying the way he had stood there, so still, so deliberate, like he was waiting for something only he could see. Sometime past midnight, I got up for a glass of water and, out of habit, glanced out the bedroom window. The street was empty, bathed in the dim glow of the streetlights. But then, my eyes drifted to his house, and I froze. The curtains, which had remained tightly shut since the day he moved in, were open. Just a sliver, but enough for me to see inside. And there he was, standing at the window, looking directly at my house. He wasn't moving. He wasn't doing anything, just standing there in the dark. A chill ran down my spine as I stood frozen by the window, my breath catching in my throat. He didn't seem to notice that I had spotted him, or maybe he didn't care. His silhouette remained perfectly still, framed by the dim light from inside his house. I told myself to look away, to just go back to bed and forget I had seen anything. But I couldn't. Something about the way he stood there, rigid and unblinking, made it impossible to turn away. Then, slowly, he raised his hand. Not in a wave, not in any kind of greeting, just a slow, deliberate motion, lifting his arm until his palm was pressed flat against the glass. It felt wrong, unnatural, like he was testing something. My stomach twisted. I stepped back from the window, my pulse pounding in my ears. I didn't want to see what he would do next. I shut the blinds, locked the window, and sat on the edge of my bed, listening to the silence. I told myself I was imagining things, that there was nothing to be afraid of. But deep down, I knew better. Sleep didn't come easy that night. Every creak of the house, every distant sound from the street made me flinch. I tried to reason with myself. Maybe he wasn't watching me at all. Maybe he was lost in thought, staring at nothing in particular. But that slow, deliberate movement of his hand against the glass lingered in my mind. It wasn't absent-minded. It was intentional. By morning, I convinced myself it had been a trick of the light, my aging eyes playing games with me. I went about my day as usual, brewed coffee, sat on the porch, read the newspaper. But the house across the street sat in its usual silence, the curtains drawn tightly once again. If not for what I had seen the night before, I might have believed the place was empty. Then, just as I was about to turn the page of my paper, I noticed something that made my fingers tighten around the edges. The front door of his house was open, just a crack, barely noticeable, but open. And yet no one came in, no one came out. It just stood there, slightly ajar, like an invitation or a warning. I tried to ignore it, but the longer I stared, the more unsettled I became. No wind had blown it open. It was a still morning, the trees barely swaying. And yet, the door remained slightly ajar, like someone had meant to close it but changed their mind at the last second. My gut told me to look away, to mind my own business, but something about that open door gnawed at me. Was he inside, standing just beyond the threshold, watching? Minutes passed. I kept expecting movement. Perhaps the man would step out, stretch, maybe take in the morning air like a normal neighbor. But the doorway remained empty, leading only into darkness. My coffee had long gone cold in my hands when I finally forced myself to stand. I told myself I wasn't going over there. I had no reason to. But I'd be damned if I spent the rest of my day staring at that eerie, open door. I turned my back to it, retreating inside my own home. But as I reached for my own door, something made me hesitate, a feeling almost instinctual, like a prickle at the back of my neck. Slowly, cautiously, I glanced over my shoulder. The door was closed. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I double-checked the locks, something I hadn't done in years, and kept the blinds drawn tight. But sleep wouldn't come. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that open door, the darkness behind it, the way it had shut without a sound. At some point past midnight, I gave up on sleeping and made my way to the kitchen for a glass of water. The house was silent, save for the hum of the refrigerator. But as I reached for the cabinet, I hesitated. Something felt off. I turned, my gaze drifting toward the living room window. The blinds were down, but there was a gap, just barely wide enough to see through. And standing outside, in the dim glow of the streetlight, was him. The man from across the street. He wasn't on his porch. He wasn't near his house at all. He was standing on my lawn, perfectly still, facing my house. Facing me. My breath caught in my throat. He wasn't moving, wasn't shifting his weight or adjusting his stance. Just standing there like a statue, his arms hanging limply at his sides. The streetlight cast his face in shadow, but I knew he was looking right at me. I swallowed hard, every instinct screaming at me to step back, to move away from the window, to pretend I hadn't seen him. But my feet wouldn't move. For a long moment, neither of us did. The space between us felt impossibly small despite the walls and locked doors. Then, in one slow, unnatural motion, his head tilted to the side. Not a nod, not a twitch, a deliberate tilt, as if he were studying me, waiting for something. My stomach twisted. I forced myself to move, reaching for the curtain with trembling fingers. As soon as I yanked it shut, blocking him from view, a noise echoed through the house. A soft, rhythmic tapping. Not from the window, from the front door. My pulse thundered in my ears as I stood frozen by the door, waiting for another knock. Another sign that he was still there, but nothing came. Just silence. Slowly, I forced myself to breathe, to shake off the fear creeping into my bones. I reached for the lock, not to open it, but to make sure it was secure. The next morning, I gathered my courage and stepped outside. The neighborhood looked the same as it always had, calm, quiet, untouched by the strange events of the night before. But across the street, something was different. His house, which had always seemed lifeless, now had a moving truck in the driveway. I watched as the man carried a single bag to the truck, his movements steady, his expression unreadable. For the first time, he turned and met my gaze. He nodded once, a silent farewell. Then, without a word, he climbed into the truck and drove away. I never saw him again. And strangely, I never saw anyone move into that house, either.